we have right now then accept this new system. You see, what they do is they make it so bad people will accept anything. They accept this new system that now, interestingly enough, not just the neoconservatives and all these conservative groups out there pushing for charter schools with their unelected school boards. Charter schools are required for workforce training. Obviously, if you had an elected school board, even the dumb ones, they are not going to vote to turn the academic system over to workforce training to spin off profits for the corporate fascists. They're not going to do that. So you have to get rid of the elected school boards. And this has been in the works for a long time. I have a long document in my book by Laverne Cunningham in 1980s. He was in Kentucky when David Hornbeck from Carnegie was destroying the schools down there. Laverne Cunningham spelled out very clearly, we have to get rid of elected school boards. Okay, well, they're getting rid of them now. We have legislation in Maine. Luckily, the legislature did, they turned this down, the school choice one. That school choice legislation, supported by our so-called conservative governor, would have funded with tax money charter schools, religious schools, private schools, and homeschoolers. Scary as the dickens. Now, remember, folks, any school-to-work legislation that you have, which is all the upward conditioning, teaching the global values, getting the Baldrige Award. If you're a good school, you got the TQM Baldrige Award. No grades, kindergarten through 12th grade, no ABCD. I mentioned that before. This is the Soviet system. This is the system that they're putting in right now, and the conservatives love it. Now, the reason I ask for you, please buy my new abridged, updated version of the book, is that the update, which is the first chapter, has all the information you need in it, about 15 pages, of what is going on now and how they're going to use school choice to implement the unelected Soviet system in this country. Okay? Now, don't forget, Norman Dodd was told in 1953 by Raoul Gaither of the Ford Foundation, when they were doing the investigation of the tax-exempt foundations, he was told that the foundation's agenda was determined by the White House. And that agenda was to use their money, the foundation money, to change America so that it could be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union.
Let me stop you again. Let me stop because we need to have an interchange on this. Today they've announced Russian troops training to take on, quote, American terrorists. Mainstream media, suddenly Russia was our enemy, now they're our buddy. And look at this. I want to talk about this because you're talking about this incremental thing. We want to stay in the current bad system because they were meant to wreck the new system, which is really the old system, to bring us into the new system. The first few pages of your book from 1983 briefly tell folks the story of how they go from Little Frog Lick Creek High School to Kidney Bean Township, something that just sounds reasonable, to Greater Corn County HS, to Central State Educational Facility. This is Agenda 21, before they even passed that. Big Brother National Information Distribution Center. He's all hateful now. Now they have the FEMA Corps. Imperial Interplanetary Propaganda System. Our Lady of Benevolent Dictatorship, One World Global Training Corps. And it ends with Interplanetary Carbon Unit, which we now hear carbon taxes. Tell us about this person that did this cartoon, because in '83, they had the full plan. These terms weren't even introduced yet.
I'm very glad you brought this up, Alex, because just today, I think some of your listeners have heard about the Council on Foreign Relations' latest book on the need for educational reform. Well, this is just over. It just keeps happening. It's the dialectic. Gradualism. If you want to get something, you have to create hysterics, panic, everything else, telling the American people everything's falling apart, and then you move in with a new agenda. Now, let me point out, you just mentioned 1983, very interesting time. I was in the office in the Department of Education that carried out the agenda, the nation at risk. Remember that? That report, A Nation at Risk, that said that a rising tide of mediocrity, and if a foreign country did this to us, we would consider it an act of war because the schools were so rotten. Huh? Well, okay, what happened at that point? That's why I saw all of this. It's all in my book, Terrell Bell, all the quotes, what they were doing. They had to create the crisis, pretended there was a crisis. There wasn't. In 1983, our schools were really still pretty damn good, excuse my language. But they told everybody they weren't so that they could switch from the brain-based academic system to the Pavlovian system for the school-to-work agenda, so that we'd be preparing, our children would be trained, not educated, for the global system going in right now. So that's what happened. They put the Skinner method in across the board. They'd already experimented with all the minorities since 1960. I have a good article on my website called Experimentation on Minorities. That's why the minority kids, not completely, but that is certainly the major reason they had the declining test scores in the inner cities, because they used the Skinner method. They don't care about the test scores, academic. Forget it. They haven't cared about those test scores since 1934, when the Carnegie Corporation called for using the schools to change America from a free market system to a planned economy in the new order. That is a marvelous little book. It's on my son's website, AmericanDeception.com. It's also included in my book, Deliver Dumbing Down. The proof is there. Carnegie continually, every 5 years, put money into testing, into the Education Commission of the States, into the National Assessment, into the Carnegie Soviet Academy of Science Agreement. Can you imagine developing software for the computer in critical thinking for elementary school children? Well, just you better be scared, folks, okay? That was when Reagan did the same thing. So in the 80s, sorry to have to say this was when the major change took place. They created a phony problem. They implemented the solution, changing the method to Skinner, getting rid of grades, getting rid of K through 12, continuous progress. All of this, the schools right now, I'm going to give you something to look up on the internet. Look up the Reinventing Schools Coalition on the internet, and you will see that is the model. That model, David Roger of the Washington Post wrote it up 8 years ago in the Washington Post, and he said the kids are graduating at 14 or 21. And the schools that do a good job with this total quality management, non-academic stuff, Skinner, get the Baldrige Award. Now, the Baldrige Award is given to corporations such as Cadillac, and you name what, okay? Is your child a car? Now, I often use the Skinner, the C.S. Lewis quote, when training beats education, which is what's happening, civilization dies. Okay, now, today I see CFR. I've got the reports in the mail. Educational decline is a national security threat. Now, folks, you know what that CFR stands for? Okay, neocons out there. Okay, all you leadership in the conservative movement and the media. What is the CFR to you? I think it's the Council for Foreign Relations, isn't it? All right. Well, they're jumping on board with you, you Trotskyite neocons. They're jumping on board. I'm going to read this. The fact that government is wait a minute here. Here's an excerpt from this report. Educational failure, puts the United States' future economic prosperity, global position, and fiscal safety at risk, warns the task force, chaired by Joel Klein, former head of New York City Public Schools, and Condoleezza Rice, former U.S. Secretary of State. Quote, the country will not be able to keep pace, much less lead globally, unless it moves to fix the problems it has allowed to fester for too long, argues the task force. It goes on. Now, look. This sounds just like in 1983, in my office, The Nation at Risk. So they just keep creating the problem, test scores go down, keep getting worse and worse and worse, until finally they're going to get the American people to say, and I've heard Americans say this, good people with brains, well, Charlotte, maybe we ought to try the charter school idea, even though it's on elected boards.
Well, let me stop you there, because I want to go back to this. It was like a decade ago you told me the story of this, because now having my knowledge of this and watching it played out, it says copyright PETT Cap'n. And if I remember correctly, you were saying this was a joke in the Department of Education, because only the, but correct me if I'm wrong, as I'm going from like 10 years of memory, only an insider could have done this, because it's 1950, Little Frog Creek High School. Then they just train you, let's just change the name, it's reasonable, let us change things. Kidney Bean Township, still a happy kid. Now it's Greater Corn County HS. He's still happy, but not as much. Now he's mean. Central State Education Facility, more books. Designing to not do the basics, to screw the kids up, and to break them into subgroups, either high achievers or everybody else failing. Then we moved from 2000 into 2012, Big Brother National Information Distribution Center. This is in '83, folks. 2015, you go into the future, Imperial Interplanetary Propaganda System. Then it's total shaved head. Our Lady of the Benevolent Dictatorship, One World Global Training Corps. And then pretty soon it's the happy little minion with headphones, which means CIA brainwashing. They did that. Interplanetary Carbon Unit, the carbon tax. This is actually when they get everybody ready for the mass reduction with the bioweapons from the Rockefeller Foundation documents. So the point is, this is a process for mass culling. This is a total master plan. Now, because I remember you told the story of this, and I'm going from like 10, 12-year memory. You haven't told it on my show since then. What was the story of this particular intro to your book from 1983? Because if memory serves, again, you were saying they were making jokes in the Department of Education about this.
Well, no, not really. What happened is that after I was retired from my job for leaking the documents, I went home and I was, I used to get, what's it called, educational leadership. It's the publication of the Association for Educational Research and Improvement. And they had this cartoon in there. I think it's 1985. And I looked at it, and that particular journal is very liberal. I mean, they're into all this critical thinking, garbage, Skinner, everything, and occasionally there might be an article that you could, relate to a bit, but I looked at this cartoon and I thought, whoa, what, because at that time, none of us were really thinking that forward, huh? And I thought, what's that doing in this journal? So I kept it. I clipped it, I kept it carefully. Always remembered it. Then came along 1999 when we were publishing The Big Baby here. Anyway, so in 1999, I thought, I'm going to put that in this book because that's an extraordinary cartoon. And I called educational leadership and I asked them, or Phi Delta Kappan, I think it was, Phi Delta Kappan. And I said, how can I contact Joel Patt, the cartoonist? And they said, he doesn't work for us anymore. But he's working for a very important newspaper in Kentucky. And I called him, and I said, I really love this cartoon. And he said, you still have that? He said, it's one of my favorites. I lost it. I said, well, I hold on to it, and I wish that I could use it. He said, send it to me. I'll fix it up, get the lines stronger, and this, that. And I did, and he did, and he virtually gave it to me. I've never understood the reason why they allowed that in there. It's absolutely marvelous. As you know, Alice, we put it in the front of the book and in the back of the book. But anyway, what I want to say here is that we were talking about a nation at risk, 1983, when that big bandwagon across the country and telling us all the schools were failing, we had to make so many changes, which was all Skinner that they were putting in. But anyway, this is a very interesting article here. In 1990, and I'd heard about this before, but I never got this Sandia report. I knew that it was important because the report said that the nation at risk statistics were incorrect.